Sergio was 42 years old, a truck driver used to the night roads, knowing every stretch and every mile of his usual route. He was a man accustomed to the silence of the midnight highway, the steady roar of the engine, and the strong smell of diesel that clung to his clothes. That night, like many others, he was driving steadily, the road ahead seemingly calm, until something shifted. In the thick fog blanketing the BR-101 bridge, a chill ran down his spine. It was a fleeting moment, almost imperceptible, but enough to make him squint. The sound of the radio, once constant, suddenly cut out. The clock on the dashboard froze at 2:17 a.m. The silence was deafening. Then, like a shadow invading his mind, came the vision. He saw, with terrifying clarity, the very truck he was driving caught in a multi-vehicle pileup on the bridge. Cars scattered, shattered glass, and a muffled scream echoing inside the cabin. The sensation of falling, crashing, and then nothing. Sergio felt the weight of despair, as if trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. He was back in reality, his hands slick with sweat on the wheel. His heart pounded so fiercely he could barely think. Something pushed him to act. Without hesitation, he veered off his usual route, avoiding the bridge where the vision had taken place. Every mile away felt like a step away from death. But relief was short-lived. When, at dawn, he stopped at the garage to log his deliveries, he noticed the list was stained with what looked like dried blood. A deeper chill took hold. Later, watching the company's security cameras, he saw his own silhouette driving the truck, at the exact hour he was supposed to be resting. He felt as if something was watching him. The clock stopped. The silence was deafening. The nightmare was only beginning. Sergio's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear as the sun rose, painting the garage in pale orange light. The dried blood stain on the delivery list haunted him, but what terrified him most was the footage on the security camera. There he was, behind the wheel at 2:17 a.m., the exact time when his nightmare vision had unfolded. Yet, in reality, he had stopped the truck before reaching the bridge. How was that possible? Was someone, or something, driving in his place? He wasn't alone in this nightmare. Across town, Mariana, a young dispatcher in her late 20s, was busy coordinating the night deliveries. She had been in contact with Sergio throughout the evening and had noticed his unusual nervousness over the radio. "Are you okay, Sergio? You sound different tonight," she had asked, her voice laced with concern. But he brushed it off, hiding the growing paranoia gnawing at his mind. Meanwhile, Jorge, an experienced mechanic who had worked alongside Sergio for years, watched the security footage on a cracked screen at the garage. "That's impossible," he muttered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Sergio left hours ago to get some sleep. Who was driving the truck then?" His skepticism battled with a gnawing unease. By mid-morning, news outlets exploded with reports about the horrific pileup on the BR-101 bridge. Multiple vehicles involved, several casualties, and a haunting question: what caused the crash? As Sergio scanned the headlines, his stomach tightened. The description matched his vision exactly. The trucks, the timing, even the eerie silence before the impact. How could this be coincidence? Mariana listened to a live radio report about the accident, disbelief clouding her features. "Sergio, this is exactly what you warned me about," she said quietly over the phone, her voice trembling. "But how did you know? And why didn't you take the truck through the bridge?" Sergio's silence was heavy, he was beginning to doubt his own sanity. As the day wore on, the tension inside Sergio grew unbearable. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes followed his every move. At home, every creak of the floorboard sounded like a whisper, every shadow seemed to pulse with menace. His sleep was shallow, haunted by fragmented images of the crash and his mysterious doppelganger behind the wheel. In a moment of desperation, Sergio reached out to his brother, Lucas, who lived in another state. "Lucas, something's wrong. I saw the accident before it happened. I changed the route, but someone else drove the truck anyway, he confessed during their call. Lucas's voice was skeptical but supportive. Maybe you're just stressed, Sergio. Take a break, clear your head. But Sergio knew better. The nightmare was far from over. The media frenzy only fed the growing paranoia. Friends and co-workers began whispering behind his back, questioning his mental state. Mariana remained his only anchor, urging him to stay calm and keep records of everything strange happening around him. By nightfall, Sergio found himself driving again, this time on an unfamiliar side road, heart pounding with each passing mile. Every flicker of light, every distant sound, felt like a warning. He had escaped the crash once, but now he was running from something even more elusive, the shadow that seemed to mimic his every move, ready to claim what it believed was owed. He felt watched. The clock ticked with ominous precision. Somewhere in the distance, a faint siren wailed, or was it a scream? Sergio didn't know anymore. The line between reality and nightmare was blurring, and he feared the nightmare was winning. The morning fog hung thick over the small town where Sergio's co-workers gathered, still shaken from the accident that had rocked their lives. Among them was Mariana, nervously pacing outside the dispatch office, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The news had arrived like a punch to the gut. Carlos, one of the drivers who had narrowly escaped the BR-101 pileup, was dead. Carlos's death was strange, almost absurd. While repairing a flat tire on a quiet country road, a delivery van lost control and barreled straight toward him. The chain of events was almost comical in its randomness, yet the outcome was fatal. Witnesses said Carlos tried to jump out of the way, but the van struck him anyway, as if fate itself had orchestrated the collision. Sergio felt a cold knot tighten in his chest as he heard the news. He had known Carlos since his early days on the road, a jovial man who had joked even in the darkest moments. But now, the laughter was silenced, replaced by a creeping dread. The accident was too coincidental, too perfectly timed. It fit the pattern Sergio had feared. Meanwhile, Jorge was skeptical, dismissing the idea that some supernatural force was at play. People die every day in accidents. It's tragic, sure, but it's not a curse, he argued bitterly when Sergio brought up his fears. But even Jorge's hardened expression faltered when he noticed the eerie timing. Carlos's death happened exactly 1 week after the bridge accident. Mariana, torn between belief and doubt, tried to comfort Sergio. Maybe this is just bad luck, she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. But Sergio wasn't so sure anymore. The paranoia had settled deep in his bones. He began to notice strange coincidences. The ticking of clocks stopping at odd moments, the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, the strange silhouette caught in security footage that no one could explain. That night, Sergio stayed awake, the house filled with silence except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant howl of a dog. He sat staring at the blood-stained delivery list, tracing the blotches with trembling fingers. The pattern was emerging, terrifying and undeniable. The clock struck 2:17 a.m. The time frozen in his vision. He felt it again, the weight of something unseen pressing down on him, the inevitable pull of a fate he could neither fight nor escape. Someone else would die next. And Sergio knew it. Sergio sat at the edge of his bed, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, surrounded by scattered newspaper clippings, printouts, and scribbled notes. The eerie pattern had taken shape in his mind, each death, a step in a relentless sequence, like the grim ticks of an unseen clock. He could almost map the grim schedule, who lived, who died, and who was next. Mariana joined him one evening, her face pale but determined. "I've been tracking the news, Sergio. Each incident lines up exactly with what you feared," she whispered. "We need to warn the others, maybe even stop this before it's too late." But their urgency was met with skepticism. Jorge, clinging to rational explanations, insisted it was coincidence. We can't live in fear of shadows, he argued. Yet even he couldn't deny the mounting evidence. Sergio's paranoia deepened. Every phone call, every message felt like a warning. He tried desperately to reach Lucas, his brother, to warn him, but the line always went dead, or worse, he heard only faint, distorted breathing on the other end. His heart hammered as he imagined the worst. Days later, the second death came. Isabel, the young dispatcher who had doubted Sergio's warnings, was found unconscious in her apartment, a bizarre accident involving a gas leak and a fall down the stairs. The timing was chilling. Exactly 2 days before the predicted moment Sergio had jotted down. Sergio arrived too late. Holding Isabel's trembling hand as paramedics wheeled her away, he realized that this pattern was no mere coincidence. The force behind these deaths was merciless, inexorable. Determined not to let another life slip away, Sergio tried to reach Mariana that night. His voice was tense, pleading, "You have to listen, Mariana. The pattern. I know who's next. I'm going to try to stop it." But when he arrived at her apartment, the door was ajar, the lights off. His footsteps echoed down the empty hallway. "Mariana," he called, voice cracking. Silence answered. He found her trembling in the dark living room, clutching her phone, eyes wide with fear. "I thought I saw something," she whispered. "Something moving in the shadows." Sergio knew then that the unseen watcher was closing in. The clock ticked louder in his ears. The pattern was tightening its grip. Death was not to be cheated. The walls of Sergio's tiny apartment were plastered with maps, articles, and photos, each connected by red strings like the threads of a sinister web. The group had gathered there, desperate for answers, their faces shadowed under the dim light of a flickering lamp. Mariana, Sergio, and Jorge pored over every detail, looking for patterns, connections, any clue that could break the relentless cycle chasing them. "We're not the first to face this," Mariana said, voice shaking but resolute. "Look here, old newspapers, internet forums, stories of strange accidents, all tied to phantom drivers or cursed deliveries. They all end the same way." The room grew colder as the weight of history settled on their shoulders. Jorge's skepticism wavered, replaced by grim determination. "So what do we do? Wait for death's next move? Or try to outsmart it?" His question hung in the stale air like a challenge. They devised a plan. If the cycle could be broken by changing the order, by skipping turns, or swapping places, they had to try. Sergio, as the one with the premonitions, volunteered to stay put, hoping that by doing nothing, the curse might pass him by. Mariana and Jorge took turns staying in safer places, avoiding their usual routines, hoping to fool fate. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. Days passed without incident. A fragile hope blossomed. But the reprieve was shattered when Lucas, Sergio's brother, was found dead in his apartment, a victim of a mysterious fall, circumstances eerily similar to the deaths described in the stories. Panic surged. The curse was adapting, relentless. Sergio's hands trembled as he stared at the blood-stained delivery list once again. The phantom load was not just a ghost story, it was a warning, and it was coming for them all. "Time is running out," he whispered. "And death. Death always collects what it's owed." The room was thick with tension as Sergio and Mariana sat across from each other, the weight of loss pressing down on them like a suffocating fog. Only the two remained, everyone else had fallen victim to the invisible force stalking them. The air was heavy with unspoken fears and desperate hope. Sergio's hands shook slightly as he laid out the final plan on the worn table. "We need to face it head-on. No more running. We lure whatever's hunting us into the open, trap it. Break the cycle once and for all." Mariana nodded, determination flickering in her eyes despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "But how? What exactly are we fighting?" Sergio looked up, the shadows dancing in the dim light revealing the haunted man he'd become. I don't know. But I know it's tied to the truck, to those deliveries. We have to confront the source. That night, they drove to the garage where it all began, the ghostly hum of the night road wrapping around them. The security cameras, the blood-stained delivery list, it was all waiting. Sergio felt the familiar chill, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant rumble of engines. They set their trap, lights flashing, cameras rolling, prepared to catch the ghost in the act. Hours dragged on with no sign, until a shadow moved on the screens, a silhouette behind the wheel, driving at a time when no one should have been there. Sergio's breath caught in his throat. It's here. The truck rolled by the garage, alone, silent, a phantom load carrying death itself. When dawn broke, Sergio and Mariana felt the first fragile threads of hope. The curse seemed broken. The haunting stopped. For now. But deep inside, Sergio knew, this was only the calm before the storm. The clock was ticking. Death's grasp was patient, and it always finds its prey. Months had passed since the nightmare seemed to end. Sergio had moved to a quieter town, far from the relentless highway and the ghostly truck. He tried to rebuild his life, working odd jobs, keeping his head down, hoping the past would stay buried. The scars ran deep, but the haunting silence was a balm. Yet, the small coincidences began, subtle, almost invisible. The ticking clock that stopped at the same minute every day. A shadow crossing the street behind him, just out of sight. A chill in the air when no wind blew. Sergio felt it again, the same heavy weight pressing on his chest. One evening, alone in his modest apartment, Sergio was going through old delivery lists, when a faint noise echoed in the hall. He froze, senses sharpening. The silence that followed was deafening. A sudden sharp sound, like a snap, broke the stillness. Sergio gasped, a soft, muffled scream barely escaping his lips. Then, nothing but silence. The darkness swallowed him whole. Outside, the night carried on indifferent. The cruel, patient fate had finally completed its cycle.